Lots to talk about, Sean, from NFL Week 9. It was a pretty interesting week, a pretty weird week, I guess. Last week we talked about Week 8 having the high-scoring games, the excitement. There was some high-scoring players this week. There was some players who really had massive, massive performances. Then there was some players who didn't really have any performance from a fantasy football perspective. So kind of a studs and duds or a hits and miss week, I guess, from across the NFL for the majority of fantasy football players. We'll be breaking down a lot of those games on today's show. Sean, only one place to start, though. Pretty interesting week, and spoiler alert for later in the game, later in the show, the Buffalo Bills did lose to the New York Jets. That meant the Chiefs had a massive opportunity. The Chiefs then win against Malik Willis and the Tennessee Titans in overtime in a pretty fun game. Big day for a lot of players in this game. I talked about some players not really showing up and not having those big performances, but we had Derrick Henry with a big day, 17 for 115, 2 touchdowns for Derrick Henry. Obviously, we didn't get a lot through the air from Malik Willis, just the 80 passing yards, 16 attempts. So not a lot happening through the air from that perspective. But Patrick Mahomes with a massive game from an air yardage perspective, or a yards perspective, 446 passing yards, 68 attempts. Sean, I know this game went to overtime, but that's getting up there. 1 touchdown, 1 interception, but he had 63 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown. Travis Kelce, 106 yards, 17 targets. I know, again, mentioning those pass attempts, with 12 targets for JuJu Smith-Schuster. Both of those guys with 10 receptions, 106 yards for Kelce. We get the 88 yards for JuJu Smith-Schuster. So Mecole Hardman, the other part, Sean, I wanted to get your thoughts on. He is kind of turning into what we hoped for many years when he came out in the NFL draft. He has 9 targets, 6 receptions, 79 yards, and another touchdown for him this week. This was a pretty crazy one. Being a Chiefs fan, I'm sure it also had some spice after the Bills dropping the game earlier in the day.
Yeah, you have that Bills loss, and it looks like a huge opportunity for the Chiefs because the Bills now are looking like they will actually face a much tougher schedule. It looked like Kansas City might have the hardest schedule in the NFL and perhaps the hardest schedule by a wide margin when we started the season. But the AFC West has completely fallen apart, giving the Chiefs a moderately easy path here, at least compared to this Buffalo squad that's going to have to face teams like the Dolphins, the Patriots, the Jets. It's especially a big opportunity because you're playing the Tennessee Titans at home, and the Titans, despite the lack of offensive weapons, and this game maybe exposed that and just how egregious it is in a way that almost no other game can. You're playing this Tennessee Titans team at home. You have to win this game because the Titans, last year's AFC number 1 seed, are going to be in the mix again. They also have an extremely soft schedule when you consider their opponents in the AFC South. This is more or less a must-win for the Chiefs if they want to create an easy path, or the easiest possible path, back to the Super Bowl. The Titans a chance for a huge upset. And this game was kind of a tale of 2 halves, or 3 different sections. The Chiefs get out to a 9-0 lead, and it appears that they will win going away with Malik Willis at the helm for the Titans. But then the Chiefs, I don't know if fall apart is the right word, but they go 7 consecutive possessions without scoring. Hard to believe you'd ever see that from Kansas City. You mentioned the sharp contrast here. The Chiefs needed 1 more yard to get to 500. They outgained Tennessee by 270, but they got very, very close to losing this game. Yeah. And again, just impossible numbers, right? Patrick Mahomes, 68 passing attempts. He obviously had plenty of other plays where he scrambles. That was 52 more passing attempts than Malik Willis. Willis only completes 5 out of 16. And so you have 38 more completions by Patrick Mahomes. And yet again, I mean, the Chiefs almost lost. You could argue that they should have lost an epic performance by the Tennessee Titans defense. If they had come through and won this game, it probably would have been one of the greatest regular season defensive performances of all time. I mean, it was at that level for them when you consider what they did to hold the Chiefs in check. Their offense.
Looking, Sean, just at offensive plays, you were mentioning some of the stats there. It works out that we had a total, I was just working it out here, we had 87 offensive plays for the Chiefs. We just had the 45 for the Titans. So very, very heavily tilted to one side there.
Yeah, I mean, it was insane. And you look at the Titans side, it was a little bit odd that Derrick Henry only got 17 carries in this game. He has had some games recently up over 30. If they had, we never say this. We never say this, even about the Tennessee Titans, even about Derrick Henry, that you needed to get them more involved. It's almost always the case where if you had a little bit more balance, it probably would have helped the team slightly. In this one, I don't think that you can make that claim. When you only complete 5 passes, it's possible, obviously, to accomplish what I'm about to say. But the Titans only targeted receivers on 4 passes. And they do escape this game with 0 completions to the wide receivers. You get 1 big play to Okonkwo. He looked really fast. I mean, this is a situation where if you look down the line some, Okonkwo is someone who you might want to be stashing in really deep dynasty leagues. He was a little bit of a trendy name in the offseason. Because of that athleticism, it was on full display on that one specific receptions. You have Austin Hooper catching 2 passes. You have Hassan Haskins catching a pass. Talk about fantasy-specific takeaways. Here's a guy who looks good and actually played a little bit on offense in this game. He's been covered up by Dontrell Hilliard. If anything were to happen to Derrick Henry, and we definitely hope that nothing does, then Haskins might be the guy who ends up taking the bulk of the work. I mentioned that a couple times in the last month of the 0 RB playbook. Keep your eye out for that. And then Dontrell Hilliard does catch a pass and lose 4 yards. So Robert Woods 0 for 2, Chris Conley 0 for 1. A beautiful pass on that one down the sideline from Willis. Conley does drop it. I mean, it's a deep pass. There's decent coverage, but he makes a great athletic play to get in position to make the catch and then doesn't really get anywhere close to catching. It's one of the issues that Conley has always had, is one of the reasons why, or the big reason why, someone with his athleticism, and he's one of those guys up at the very top in terms of freak score, why, I mean, he's just not an NFL receiver. If you have him out there on the field, that's a huge problem for your team. And then Nick Westbrook-Akine also fails to catch his lone target. The Chiefs fight their way back in this one. It's crazy to think that Mahomes throws 68 times, 446 yards, but really all of the big plays came with him scrambling. He gets the touchdown. He gets the 2-point conversion. You mentioned Travis Kelce. Kelce actually played a very poor game, bats one of the passes into an interception, which is maybe the pivotal play that gives the Titans a chance to win this game. The two of them seem to be off much more than they usually are. Kelce gets open deep late, and Mahomes misses him by a mile. The 17 targets are things that are going to happen if you have 68 passing attempts, but there at the very end, he makes an extraordinary catch on a pass thrown well behind him, makes the play leaping back against his momentum. That's why Travis Kelce is the best tight end in the NFL and can put up games like this. Smith-Schuster actually catches 10 out of 12, as you mentioned. He looks very good in a possession role. The 6 catches for 79 yards and a touchdown for Hardman, most of that is still manufactured. This actually wouldn't be very impressive in a game where Patrick Mahomes even throws just half of what he did. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, if he throws half as many times, is still 34 passing attempts. Mecole Hardman killed one of the drives late with a bad drop. That could have cost the Chiefs the game. I think if you're a Chiefs fan, you're still hoping that as they develop, Sky Moore was out there a few times. Kadarius Toney out there catches a ball on the first offensive play of the game. But the other big element here is the Chiefs just simply have the worst running back room in the NFL. And I don't know if there are any that are even close, right? They rush, in terms of CEH, Pacheco, and McKinnon, have 12 carries for 14 yards. That's the other way that you end up with 68 passing attempts, because it's absolutely pointless to run the ball with this crew.
Yeah, not great there, but like you said, Sean, better off to have it in Patrick Mahomes' hand, and that they have those short passes then that are kind of pretty much at this point extended run plays, with the run game has not been good for Kansas City. Sean, pairing it together, I think the theme is going to morph in this show into Russian quarterbacks. We started off with Patrick Mahomes, then in the Bills game, which is also tied to the Chiefs game. I'm trying to see if we can sync this up and have a theme throughout the show. But we have the Bills losing 20-17 to the New York Jets. This game, Sean, I thought overall the running quarterback element again, if Josh Allen shows up, he has 9 for 86 and 2 rushing touchdowns in this game. Just the 205 passing yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. One of those a really, really poor interception as well that he did have. So overall, when we look at the receiving numbers for Buffalo, really it is Stefon Diggs and not a huge amount else. He gets 10 targets, 5 receptions, 93 yards. Gabe Davis just the 33 yards and 2 receptions for him, and everyone else trailing in behind that. The other takeaway, Sean, I think from the New York Jets side is we have seen the last 2 weeks now that even with Zach Wilson, Garrett Wilson is starting to put up pretty consistent fantasy numbers. And it's only 2 weeks, but throughout the season as a rookie, he's been very solid. Zach Wilson did go out for a short portion of this game, does come back in, does just have 154 passing yards, 1 touchdown, but Garrett Wilson getting 92 of those yards on 9 targets, 8 receptions. After that, again, not a huge amount happening in the receiving game. I thought Michael Carter looked pretty good in this game as well. 12 for 76, 1 touchdown rushing, and then 1 for 10 on 1 target through the air. Disappointing result for the Buffalo Bills. The other interesting note on this, Sean, is based on how this division has gone. You mentioned the Chiefs division kind of falling apart with how it has gone for the Broncos, the Ravens, or the Raiders and such in that division. But we look at the AFC East standings now. The Bills are now 0-2 in the division, but they do lead the division based on record. So they are 6-2. The Jets are now 6-3. We also have the Miami Dolphins at 6-3, and we have the Patriots now after today's performance up to 5-4. So that division proven to be, like you mentioned with the schedule, a lot tougher than people might have been expecting. And sometimes when you're in that chase for the number 1 overall seed, suddenly you lose a game, and it is a case where you start looking behind you. And this is pretty close in the AFC. In this game, Sean, what was your takeaways? We've talked a lot about Garrett Wilson, obviously. It has to be positive that we see him, picking up in PPR formats those 17.9 points today, based on how we had things for a couple of weeks. And the not positive thing is, Sean, Elijah Moore didn't get traded. He gets no targets in this game. He looks like the invisible man.
Yeah, and I think that's still something that could be revisited in the off season. But Garrett Wilson, he looks unbelievable. This is the path that, and it hasn't been as explosive because the passing options at quarterback, you have Joe Flacco now, obviously Zach Wilson, are so different than what Justin Jefferson was dealing with. But this is that type of emergence. It's probably not going to be to the Jamar Chase level, but I think that Wilson is now pushing, when you think about dynasty, and you think about that top tier that is very clearly just Jefferson and Chase because of what they've done so early in their careers, how young they are, how that could carry for a decade. Wilson isn't there yet, especially because wins like this actually have the potential to cement Zach Wilson as not necessarily the long-term quarterback for the Jets, but the medium term. If they pull off too many more upsets like this, he's at least going to get that opportunity to come back and build on it next season. They flashed some graphics up on the screen during the game today showing how Wilson and Josh Allen's numbers look almost identical through their first 18 games. That kind of thing is going to give the Jets, especially again as they're winning, some confidence that maybe he can come around, because you saw today he has a scramble. He was 5 for 24, nothing at all like what you're getting from the Josh Allen side, but he has that athleticism. He's got the big arm. The reasons that he was drafted number 2 overall were evident in this one, and yet also, again, the continued struggles. Now, because the Bills have an elite defense, the fact that he was able to play as well as he was, the fact that Garrett Wilson managed to catch 8 of his 9 targets, those things are positive. I do also think it's interesting because even though Denzel Mims only catches 1 of his 4 targets, you can see the athleticism that he brings to the table and some of the things that it does to the opposing defense in terms of having to account for him. It would be a huge stretch to say that he gives them more than Corey Davis, for example, but I like having him out there. And this is not the kind of breakout game that's going to get him more opportunity. But if Elijah Moore is going to be buried, if Davis is going to be out, as opposed to, manufacturing touches for Braxton Berrios. It'd be great to see Mims a little bit more involved. This is another game here too, where the tight ends don't get nearly as many targets as they have recently. Conklin has been a target machine today, just catches 1 out of his 2. James Robinson has the big play on the touchdown reception. He's nothing like Breece Hall, but the combination of Robinson and Carter, pretty intriguing. They do have now, again, that thunder and lightning. As long as Robinson's knees hold up, he should be a great complement there. I like the way that this team looks, and if Wilson can take it to another level, it doesn't have to be an elite level, but just from being not anywhere close to a competent NFL quarterback to being a legitimate starter, then Garrett Wilson is going to absolutely go crazy. You look to the other side, and this is really probably the first terrible game that Josh Allen has played going back multiple seasons. It was maybe a little bit more reminiscent of some of the games that he had last year from an overall passing perspective. Obviously, Diggs, still a very strong game here, and so with 14.3 fantasy points. So it doesn't get a touchdown, only catches half of his targets, doesn't break too many of the long plays, does have a 42-yard reception. But this is more like what they looked like, and that combination looked like that connection a season ago when Diggs was disappointing. They do need to have that second target emerge. Had a lot of great offers for Gabe Davis this week. Didn't necessarily pull the trigger on any of them. We'll see if any of those opposing managers are still interested after he puts up a 2 for 33 in this game. And the flip side of it is just that New York's defense was fantastic. Sauce Gardner continues to look like a huge hit as a top 5 selection for them and one of the emerging superstars on defense. To have hit on so many of their picks on this draft, the Jets have to be absolutely ecstatic. And again, just like fantasy managers, a little bit bummed that Breece Hall is out. But really across the board, the Buffalo offense for the first time looked not just mediocre, they looked bad. I mean, Josh Allen throwing inaccurately and then throwing directly to the defense on numerous occasions. Devin Singletary, James Cook, these guys rushed 12 times for 39 yards. Neither of them able to break the big play. And frankly, the Buffalo offensive line never opens any holes. These guys have to beat the first defender in the backfield on almost all of their carries. That then puts more pressure on the passing game. So similar really to the Chiefs here, but the Bills aren't able to create that volume, aren't able to come away with the victory.
So Sean, Russian quarterbacks continuing, but this one is a fantasy bonanza. And this one also is involving the Miami Dolphins, which is a theme of the Miami Dolphins contest. But this week, Sean, we get Justin Fields rushing the ball for 178 yards, 1 touchdown. That touchdown, Sean, is a 61-yard rush attempt that he goes for. That means that he finishes today with 42.7 fantasy points, just 123 passing yards, but he does have 3 passing touchdowns in this contest. 2 of those going to Cole Kmet, who we talked about last week, getting his first touchdown in over a year. He gets 2 here, 5 receptions for him, 2 receiving touchdowns, 9 rush yards. So in those tight end premium leagues that we're playing in, that's 24.5 points, which is a massive outing from a tight end. And with the bye weeks, people may have him slotted into the starting lineups and with the touchdown last week, but these last 2 weeks have been very positive. But what has been positive for fantasy purposes, obviously the Bears will lose in this game, but we go from a situation where the Bears really could get nothing going the first couple of weeks of the season. There was like no fantasy points ever coming from this offense. They've started now to let Justin Fields do kind of what we were talking about, some of those scrambles, some designed rushes for him as well. And this here is kind of has to be very positive. They also make the trades during the week where they trade for Claypool, but they do trade away some of their best defensive players, which is likely going to mean that they need to up things on offense, continuing moving forward here. We get 8 targets for Darnell Mooney, 43 yards, 7 receptions, 1 touchdown coming his way. I mentioned Cole Kmet's numbers on 6 targets. Disappointing for Chase Claypool, but his first game in there, 6 targets, 2 receptions for 13 yards. But Sean, the big note here I wanted to mention is Tyreek Hill is now the fastest player to 1,000 yards in the Super Bowl area. He did pass Calvin Johnson. He now has 1,104 yards on the 2022 season, which is incredible. He goes for 143 yards, 7 receptions, 1 touchdown, 27 fantasy points for him. The question on him, Sean, is should he be doing backflip touchdown celebrations. I'm always concerned about, like, what about in the fourth quarter when those hamstrings tighten up? But he didn't seem to have that issue today. But Jaylen Waddle, 85 receiving yards, 5 receptions, 1 touchdown for him. But Tua continues to look fantastic. 3 passing touchdowns, 300 yards going his way. The Dolphins are just so fun. It's very concentrated on offense, but it's absolutely fantastic to watch. And I think the Justin Fields breakout over the last kind of 3 or 4 weeks has been great to see. Obviously, the season started disappointing, but this is kind of when he was drafted what we were hoping that he could potentially become.
Yeah, it's really cool, right? Sets the single game record for rushing yards. One of my preseason bold predictions was that Fields would rush for 1,000. He looks like he probably will do that pretty easily. The speed that he brings to the table is
that touchdown was electric. That was,
yeah. I didn't think we were going to see another rushing quarterback like Lamar Jackson, for another 10, 15, 20 years. Maybe that shouldn't have been the thought, because it wasn't that long ago that we had Michael Vick doing video game things out there on the NFL field. It's kind of crazy because you could almost argue that Fields is a mix of those two players and brings a lot of the best of both of them to the table. He has the ability to get kind of those downfield runs or the downhill type of runs that Jackson, at least in my mind, they're his signature. He can just take it, hit the edge, and he looks like not a power running back, but he's not having to reverse his field, break this way, break that way, do all of these crazy gyrations to get open. He sees the hole, he hits the hole. He runs like an elite downhill running back. Fields brings that element, but also the game-breaking ability, that Barry Sanders-esque sort of change of direction ability. He's back there actually avoiding tackles on a lot of passing plays, whereas more of the rushes for Jackson are designed plays for him specifically to run from the get-go. 15 carries in this game for Fields. There was no point at which the Dolphins had any answer when he would decide to pull it down and run. You could see him go for 200 yards in a game at some point as the season progresses. He still passed fairly inefficiently, but all of those runs set up the 3 touchdown passes. Cole Kmet looked better. This is more what we're looking for Darnell Mooney. You're never going to have these huge target games within this offense for Mooney, but he has 8 in this one. He catches 7. He gets the score. It's just too bad that they don't come through and win this game. I really felt like, and again, I don't have a huge rooting interest in this one, so it's probably less biased than when I chime in on the Lions or the Cardinals or the Chiefs, for example. There was a pretty blatant pass interference call against the Bears early on that moved the Dolphins 2/3 of the way down the field. There was just a missed call. There was nothing remotely like pass interference on that particular play. It set the Dolphins up to be able to grab a pretty good lead as the Bears are trying to come back at the end. And again, they lose 35-32. There's a pretty flagrant pass interference against Chase Claypool that is not called, and you end up having a change of possession. And so if those 2 calls go the right way, the Bears probably win this game. Again, that's not really the case because everything else would have transpired differently after each individual play. But if you're a Bears fan, you've got to be really excited. The Bears are close to actually being in this thing in the NFC. It's probably not going to work out that way. They're probably not that disappointed. They're kind of a year or 2 away in terms of what they're building. But I think now when you have Fields as the foundation, the long term there should be really cool. I don't know that you can even necessarily say that about any of the other franchises who drafted a QB in that draft. The 49ers still have plenty of questions about Trey Lance. They should have almost certainly gone with Justin Fields. He's going to be the guy who would have done what they needed. Trevor Lawrence does rally the Jaguars for victory today, but that probably says more about where the Las Vegas Raiders are. Mac Jones, solid in an easy victory for the Patriots. But if you could go and choose one of these guys right now, you would want it to be Fields. we'll see how they build around him. They added Claypool. We'll see if he can develop any more as a passer. On the other side, you mentioned Tua and how amazing he looked. If there was one like little nitpick in this game, and it's not really that little if you are a fantasy manager, would be that Jaylen Waddle was behind the defense for a 77-yard touchdown to put the dagger in this game. That's a 14-point play in fantasy. And, you can always say that, and it's like, would he really have actually been able to maintain his momentum and score? You hear people say that kind of thing all the time. He was so far behind the defense that there's no question. If the ball isn't underthrown by like a 15 yards, then he's going to go the whole way, especially with the long speed that Waddle has. That's too bad. We know that Tua doesn't have that strong of an arm. So much of this is based on timing. The timing and the play design from Mike McDaniel has been insanely good. These guys targeted over the middle relentlessly. That part of it gives you a much higher efficiency level than these passes to the sideline where you have the sideline involved, and it makes it more difficult to run after the catch. He's been, even with what they're accomplishing there in Minnesota, he has been the breakout star in the coaching ranks this season. Both of those guys, you mentioned the yardage for Tyreek Hill. He also gets a touchdown. This was a fun game for the things that we invested in going into the season. Colin, I have an absolute ton of Justin Fields in underdog. He was really the last. He and Tua, ironically, are the guys there who sort of slammed shut the QB window. If you look at where they were drafted from a round perspective, where they were drafted from a QB rank perspective, that's the end of the window. And then you didn't necessarily want the guys below them. For those two players to come in at the end there and score so many points, and obviously Fields has really been coming on lately as I was just kind of scrolling through my underdog. Before we started out the show, I don't think it'll surprise anybody that the teams who had monster scores today, those are Justin Fields teams. And then on the other side of it, Waddle, a huge roster percentage there. Tyreek Hill on a handful of teams, including a really fun one that I had with Ben Gretsch that we've mentioned on Stealing Bananas from time to time. This was a fun game, which is maybe not what you would have expected a month ago, but these teams, the Dolphins evolving into, I think, a clear-cut Super Bowl contender. The Bears, a team that's going to be fun for fantasy, and you look at 2020, you probably have to jump ahead a couple of years, but 2024 and on, and it's hard to be patient as a sports fan, but they look very, very fun.
Yeah, they look so much fun. And, we look back to when it was Ryan Fitzpatrick and Tua being swapped in and out in games a couple of seasons ago, and how his career started with the Dolphins versus how it's going now. And the coaching staff there really does look to be playing to these three players who are, in my opinion, superstar players at their position, playing to their strengths and giving them those opportunities. And that's what we wanted for Justin Fields as well. And it looks like over the last couple of weeks they're moving in that direction. So really fun to see those young quarterbacks moving forward, stepping up and having those big days. You mentioned that drop pass, Sean, or not drop pass, but the failed long pass, which was underthrown. That could have made Tua the kind of player of the day, I guess we'll say. But we are going to do the WinBet player of the day now. And that is going to be somebody who we do not talk a huge amount about in the most positive light. But if you sign up, you can sign up to WinBet today to receive a special sports offer. You can bet $100 to win $100. Download the WinBet app now or visit winbet.com to start winning. But Sean, that WinBet player of the day comes from the Panthers-Bengals game. It is Joe Mixon with 55.1 PPR points. He has 153 rush yards. He has 4 rushing touchdowns. He has 58 receiving yards and 4 receptions, 1 receiving touchdown. Sean, all 5 of the touchdowns coming from 14 yards or in. He has a 2-yard touchdown, a 3-yard touchdown, a 1-yard touchdown, a 14-yard touchdown, and then a 12-yard receiving touchdown. So we often talk about when we're in there, give it to, T. Higgins and things like that. But this week we can't really complain because he was quite efficient with those opportunities in the red zone. Strange day here, really comfortable victory for the Cincinnati Bengals, 42-21 it finishes up. But this game was burned out long before that. We get PJ Walker, 3 for 10, 9 passing yards, 2 interceptions. He gets benched for Baker Mayfield at a point. So nothing to be excited about. Lots of tears really on the Carolina side. I guess the bright spot might be Terrence Marshall Jr. with his 3 receptions, 53 yards, and a touchdown on 6 targets. T. Higgins has a solid day, targets, 7 receptions, 60 yards. But everything here, Sean, was about Joe Mixon.
It was. And this is the reason that drafters select him where he goes.
100%.
It's the reason that we've said, I mean, you have to have Samaje Perine stashed in every league, because this is not about Mixon, even though he deserves credit for how well he played. He averages 7 yards per carry as a rusher. He looks very comfortable in the receiving game. The touchdown that he scores there is an impressive one right in the corner of the end zone. This comes after a Tyler Boyd near touchdown is not given to him. It's kind of a tricky play because he clearly has possession when he is in the end zone, actually knocks the pylon over. I'll have to check and see exactly what the officials have ruled on that one, but it seems to me that he didn't have any body part down until
they ruled that the wide receivers couldn't. They ruled that the wide receivers couldn't score any touchdowns. It's kind of.
So this was an anti-wide receiver rule.
My takeaway here, Sean, was we have talked about like they rush up to the line and don't challenge these calls when they are clear touchdowns, and this one looked to be pretty clear, but it was that there was no body part down when he got control of the ball in the end zone. Kind of one of those where he's diving out of the end zone when he is making the catch. But they do challenge this one, and it's not successful. So what we're probably likely to see next week is T. Higgins extend his arm over the goal line, but they rush it in from the 1 yard line with Joe Mixon again. No more challenges for the Bengals.
So 5 touchdowns for Mixon. This is going to dramatically realign his fantasy point over expectation numbers. Ben and I have been joking on the show. You and I have been joking on the show. I chat a lot with Connor O'Driscoll, who does the fantastic stat chasing show. He has mentioned, obviously, in a lot of his work, that Joe Mixon has been the least efficient running back in so many different ways through the first half of this season. It just takes one massive game. And so, again, in terms of addressing this from a fantasy perspective, I think that we want to look at this type of profile, the Mixon profile, the Leonard Fournette profile, the James Conner profile, the David Montgomery profile, the Josh Jacobs profile. All of these guys are players who don't have the long speed, although Leonard Fournette, despite his size and inability to do these things on the field, Leonard Fournette actually puts up some pretty impressive GPS times on occasion. So it's not purely about the speed, but the way that they move on the field, the way that they gain yardage on the field, the long stretches of inefficiency that are then punctuated by these big games like this, their ability to break tackles, which is going to keep you in front of the coach's mind. It's going to keep you out there playing, even if the tackles that are broken do not generate a ton of extra yardage. But you take that, and then you take the receiving, we'll say prowess or ability. It's definitely that you can play them in the receiving game. They have that comfort level that then doesn't necessarily give away the tendencies to the opposing defense. It's also going to allow you, if you so desire, to stay in a certain package and not let the defense substitute. So there are some big strengths that these guys bring to the table, but also because they're not explosive runners, they can go through long stretches where they're pretty inefficient. And so when I'm looking at that group, I'm not a big buyer of them, but these are probably not players who are going to be completely and totally benched. I mean, Joe Mixon has played as bad as a player can play, and there's never been any question that they would actually go to Samaje Perine. You're going to have similar types of things in most of these situations. David Montgomery has been upstaged for a long time now, stretching all the way back into mid-last season by Khalil Herbert. He continues to be in there playing. He's likely to go to a new team next year. It could be the Kansas City Chiefs, for example. And suddenly you're into this 3-down role where you catch passes again. People ask me why I'm actually pretty high on Montgomery right now and why I'm buying. And it fits into this dynamic where you wouldn't have wanted to buy Josh Jacobs a couple of weeks ago when he was so hot. You can probably start buying him again now, but you could also wait for this to stretch out a little bit longer. Anytime that these guys really get down in price, you probably buy because you're going to be able to flip them. They're going to have games like this. I mean, probably not too many 5-touchdown games, but this is a reminder of what this profile can do and why it's drafted and arguably overdrafted, but why it is a profile that will work in that round 2-3 turn range. Mixon probably overdrafted by a round, but if you get this game in the fantasy playoffs, if you can get your team with Joe Mixon into the fantasy playoffs when you have to deal with him the rest of the year, then I mean, that's how you win a tournament. So Mixon, a potential tournament winning player, I think that you're going to have that potential from some of these other guys like a David Montgomery. Not necessarily this year for Montgomery because he has to both deal with the timeshare and deal with a situation where Justin Fields is probably not going to throw too many passes to running backs. But I think that Montgomery, when we look at the long term with him and the dynasty outlook with him, I think he's a buy.
And then when we look at some of these other contests, Sean, throughout the day, I think it's been very interesting. When we look at, like, I go into the FFPC account, I look at, my overall scoring and how the best ball teams are doing. Last week was a week where I mentioned, I think that nearly all of the teams were above 140 points. This week, we're more back down to parity. And if you have a Joe Mixon this week, you could be one of those teams who are like, in fifth spot, who suddenly finds yourself in fourth spot based on having a big jump in points. So there was a couple of players this week, and we've talked about quite a few of them so far that were massive in those best ball formats this week. They're obviously massive in regular formats. And you mentioned there, if you're hitting on those big games in a playoff game, it's just, that's what it's all about come the end of the season. So hopefully we see some of these big performances at the end of the season. But Sean, the Russian quarterback theme is back here again, and it is Kyler Murray. Murray goes for 60 yards rushing today, has a long of 21 yards on 8 attempts, but a disappointing finale to the Cardinals in this one. They lose 31-21 to the Seattle Seahawks. Kyler Murray has 2 touchdowns through the air, 175 yards passing, but a real killer kind of late fumble where he rushes for a first down and then the ball kind of squirts loose and it is recovered by the Seahawks. He did have 2 fumbles in this game, but the other one recovered by the Cardinals. Sean, Rondale Moore continues to start to impress here, 8 for 69 on 10 targets. We get Zach Ertz into the end zone, 5 for 40 for him on 8 targets. DeAndre Hopkins gets an early touchdown, and based on what we've seen over the last couple of games since he got back, it felt like at that point we're into another massive game, but he finishes with just 5 targets, 4 receptions, 36 yards, and 1 touchdown. Nothing else really happening in the passing game from the Cardinals' perspective. But on the Seahawks side, Sean, and this isn't something that we probably will continue to mention it. People didn't think that you should be drafting Seattle Seahawks in the offseason, but Geno Smith, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, 275 yards, but he also adds in 38 yards rushing on 6 attempts. But the Russian superstar, the rookie rusher that is just running away with it now, unfortunately, with the Breece Hall injury part of it, but Kenneth Walker, 26 attempts. They put this game on his shoulders, 109 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns for him. Noah Fant, Sean, has had a couple of games now over the last month where he has been more heavily featured, but he gets 6 targets here, 5 receptions, 96 yards, and showing that explosive nature of what he can do. There's not many tight ends with the athletic profile that Noah Fant has, so nearly 100 yards going his way. We have Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf kind of doing what they do. They get a touchdown. They both get 5 receptions, 67 yards for Lockett, 37 yards for Metcalf in this one. But the Seahawks continue to provide those fantasy points, and they continue to win, Sean. The Seattle Seahawks are 6-3. They're one of the most fun teams at the moment to root for in the entire NFL, in my opinion.
I think so too, because Geno is really easy to root for. Maybe it's just that I thought he had a chance back when he was drafted to be a legitimate NFL starter, and that never really happened for him until he's gotten this second life late in his career. I hope that he continues to play this way. He completely and totally upstaged Kyler Murray in this game, throwing darts to those big receivers, as you mentioned, also gets the touchdown in there for Lockett. This season, I think, has been another good example of the way that you have to have patience with some of the plays that you have outlined. And it's frustrating when it seems very obvious to you right from the get-go that if Noah Fant is going to be a big part of this trade where you lose a Russell Wilson. And it's easy to say now that maybe the Seahawks kind of knew what was coming, but obviously they did not expect Russell Wilson to go to Denver and be as bad as he has been. They could have hoped, but they could not have thought that Geno Smith would be as good as he has been. I mean, you need to make other parts of that trade work for you. And the Fant opportunity was there, and they sort of refused to use him over the first 4 to 6 weeks. He has a 51-yard reception in this game where a gigantic human being is not just lumbering down the field, but explosively running after the catch. You can see that long speed, as you mentioned, that athleticism. Hopefully this is the beginning of something big for him, or at the very least he continues to be, moderately involved. He finishes with the 6 targets, which is the same as Metcalf. It's one more than Tyler Lockett. You're not going to get him in the same target level with those two guys very often, but he should be involved. On the other side, it's a great game for Rondale Moore, who is showing the underneath work that he's always had. He's been more explosive with it in terms of actually getting upfield. He's also catching some passes at the intermediate level. He has the ability to get over the top. They're that a little bit more as the season goes along. At least we think that that's the next evolution there. But especially when you see how some of these other guys are playing, you want to see him in that role, because Robbie Anderson has really illustrated the potential traps to bailing a guy out who quits on his team, because the Cardinals lost this game because of Robbie Anderson, right? He was unbelievably bad. He's targeted 3 times. He only catches 1 pass for -4 yards. He has a back-breaking drop on 3rd down when he is wide open that stops a late second half drive. That's the play that you have to have to win this game. It doesn't turn out to be that big of a deal early on when he commits a false start by the goal, unless you're like me and have a lot more DeAndre Hopkins than Zach Ertz. Hopkins scores his 2nd touchdown of the game, but has it wiped out by an Anderson penalty. They do come back and get an Ertz touchdown, which that's the exact opposite of what I'm hoping for. So
yeah,
for me as a fan, I did not care for that one. That one didn't matter that much to the Cardinals, but they're a hard team to watch right now. Kyler Murray did a lot of good things in this game. He rushes for 60 yards, as you mentioned. As opposed to a few of the other quarterbacks, he's really getting down early. Probably something that makes sense for him. He had an injury when he was on fire in 2020. He had an injury when he was on fire in 2021. You don't want to risk that, but you contrast it to what Justin Fields is doing, and suddenly I think you can argue that in another 6 months, Fields will be the better quarterback just straight up between the two. And obviously Murray, one of the things that he really has brought to the table over the last several years is he's an elite passer. You want to balance those two elements. In this game, it wasn't even that much of an issue with his passing, although he only does average 5 yards per attempt. But in what has been sort of a trend throughout the season for the Cardinals, you have so many of these plays where they don't seem to be able to get the play in. They have to call timeout. They go to the sidelines and they yell at each other. That wasn't the case today, but they continued to snap the ball when Murray wasn't ready. He continued to drop snaps that were fine. If you're going to lose 4 or 5 plays out of a game where you simply can't do the center quarterback exchange, whether or not you're under center or it's in the shotgun, you're going to lose. There just aren't that many plays in an NFL game. One of the things Ben and I emphasize a lot on Stealing Bananas is that football and NFL football games are a matter of possessions. The Cardinals continue to shoot themselves in the foot by doing the things that Robbie Anderson did, and then by Kyler Murray not being able to handle the snap. Really the most straightforward thing that has to start any NFL play.
And then moving on, Sean, to the Atlanta Falcons and the Los Angeles Chargers. This one 20-17 to LA. If I told you, Sean, that Kyle Pitts led the team in receiving this week, would that seem like a positive? And then if I followed it up with the fact that he had 27 yards, would that seem like a negative?
Well, yes, those 2 lines are definitely disappointing. This one disappointing because Pitts actually was primed for the kind of
so
big
open
game in this one that we'd be able to say, yeah, this is a huge miss to have drafted Kyle Pitts. but a lot of the elements were there. Ben likes to
He's
mention a
open.
lot. I
He's
mentioned in
open
my
for.
article that the peripherals are there, but it's not just about peripherals, is it?
He was wide open in this game also for a kind of game-winning potential touchdown that, he's kind of leaking off towards the sideline, and the ball goes further towards the goalpost and the sideline, and it just can't make it happen. But that really obviously changes the outlook, and he was targeted 7 times. So between him and Drake London, they got 14 of the targets in this one from the 23 attempts from Marcus Mariota, 12 completions, 129 yards. For the Falcons, Sean, the running backs where it looked pretty good here. Tyler Algier looked very explosive. 10 carries for him this week with Cordarrelle Patterson back in the lineup. He goes for 99 with a long of 44. So pretty solid again from Tyler Algier here. Patterson comes in. He does get the 2 rushing touchdowns, but isn't as efficient running the ball. But he hit some runs in this where he looked like Derrick Henry on a couple of those, especially the second rushing touchdown where he bowls over a guy heading into the end zone. But overall, I guess they're glad that he's back, but that we're going to see, this to continue with the heavy rush game. They should have won this game, I think, when we get to the end of it. But we talked then on the other side. Justin Herbert is having a difficult situation based on the receivers that he has available. Obviously, he's missing out on Keenan Allen in this. He's missing out on Mike Williams. But he does have one of, if not the best receiving back in the entire NFL, and Austin Ekeler available. Gerald Everett was available as well. But I think it's a little bit tough for him when we look at the players he's playing with. But it hasn't really been that positive of a start overall to the season for him. But they are now 5-3. They do win this game by the 3 points late on in this particular one. We do get Ekeler 47 rushing yards on 14 attempts, 1 touchdown. Then we also get 9 targets with 7 receptions, 24 yards, and 1 touchdown there through the air. So he continues to put up really good numbers, obviously on a consistent basis over the last month. But he did have one where it was kind of called as a not been down. The replays and the commentary team seemed to, very confident that he wasn't down, and then they showed a different angle eventually, and his elbow did touchdown. So could have been an even bigger day if we had just had that camera footage lost for the, into the ether somewhere. But Josh Palmer, pretty good game again from him here. 10 targets, 8 receptions, 106 yards. But really, this team is at the moment built on Austin Ekeler and what he can do for the Chargers. Do you think it's a case that it is down to missing your 2 top wide receivers, is making it a little bit tricky on Justin Herbert? Or it feels like this is just kind of an early career. He's had a high trajectory. He's been very, very consistent. He's had those big games, and it might just be a little bit of a slump for him here as we are in the early mid part of the season now.
I mean, I think it's down to the lack of weapons. He has played a couple of games recently where he did not look particularly good. The sort of gunslinging lasers that he's so known for and such, accurate downfield passes haven't been there. In this one, he looked pretty good. It really kind of carried the team back. He and Ekeler, as you mentioned, scores both as a runner and as a receiver. He is the offense. Christian McCaffrey, obviously, an even better version of this, but you think about what Ekeler is doing here. And again, people who were concerned about the package that the 49ers gave up for McCaffrey are not thinking properly about what these combo running backs actually give you. Again, we mentioned what the Chiefs were dealing with tonight and how their offense is so limited by not having a player like this. If you were to put one of those backs into their offense, it would be absolutely unstoppable. You got to give these running backs credit. I mean, we talk about zero RB. We talk about how running backs are more easily replaced than wide receivers, but you have to place all of those things in context, and you have to give credit when there are these transcendent players like Ekeler. Loved watching him play. Gerald Everett, someone who is especially relevant in this game because tight end points are always at a premium, regardless of your scoring format. And he gets the 8 targets, but only catches 5 for 36. He does have a big play called back. He also has what would have been a long play that he commits a bad drop on. I mean, that's just been the storyline for him throughout his career and throughout the season, where especially with all of these wide receiver injuries and having Justin Herbert as your QB, this is your breakout chance. Everett continues to, unfortunately, squander that opportunity. You look on the other side, and this was really the first game that I think that you can put very strongly on Pitts and London, whereas before they weren't getting the chances, and this one they lose the game. It's also easily the worst game that Mariota has played. He's had some games with interceptions. He doesn't get picked in this one, but all of the missed opportunities go back to him in some way, shape, or form as well. You talked about the long pass he missed to Pitts that probably would have won the game. He also had a long pass to Pitts that was fairly well thrown, not perfectly, but a catch that a stud has to make. When you look at, why has Pitts underperformed our expectations by such a dramatic margin? Well, the game environment, the scheme, all of these elements where the Falcons just run the ball every play has been a big concern. You look at his peripherals, they're still pretty good. But one of the things that Ben and I chatted about for like 45 minutes before we recorded SB the other night was how much of the inefficiency is on him. I think some of the comparisons to stars of the past and players like Calvin Johnson, he definitely doesn't deserve that at this point. Maybe he will. It doesn't in any way wipe out what he did as a rookie, where he has this 1,000-yard season that's so rare for a tight end and did it at 21 years of age. But he just has to simply play a lot better. Now, I think it's tricky when you don't let these guys really do anything, and then you ask them to make big plays in a game to win a game, but Pitts drops that other deep catch. He had some other plays that he could have made better on the ball. I mean, when you get the 7 targets, and you got to do better than 2 catches. A similar thing for Drake London. He only catches 3, but the big mistake for him is that as the Falcons are about to go in and kind of polish this game off, he just has the ball taken away from him around the 4-yard line. You can't have that happen. The Falcons also have a play in this game where it appears that the Chargers are going to be able to ice the game, kick a field goal, but they fumble, and then as the Falcons are returning that fumble, they refumble it. And then the Chargers do get the ball back, move the ball a handful of yards into field goal range, kick the field goal to win it. So as you mentioned, the Falcons should have won this game. They're up 10-0 early. The Chargers never really make the types of plays that would pull them back. That London fumble does occur a couple of plays after a long touchdown run from Cordero Patterson is called back. So you look at his line, the multiple touchdowns. His biggest play actually was wiped out by penalty. You're going to get a lot of points going forward from Cordero Patterson and Tyler Algier, who look fantastic. If anything, this game is going to decrease Arthur Smith's already very, very low level of interest in throwing the ball.
Yeah, it probably is. I've made peace, Sean, with how this is going to play it. But the one positive thing is we are seeing some of those downfield passes now to Kyle Pitts. And you mentioned London's fumble. That was not really a fumble. It was kind of like just ripped out of his hands and returned down the field for a couple of yards. But yeah, a little bit more positive in the usage overall, even though it didn't materialize into anything today. But yeah, still a tough one, the first round picks of Kyle Pitts, but we'll see how it ends up as we move forward here in the season. Sean, we have talked about a number of games today. We're going to come back. We're going to do our Tuesday recap show. We're going to talk about the Jags and the Raiders, Washington and Minnesota, the Patriots game, the Packers game. Unfortunately, we will have to talk a little bit about that one, but we'll be doing all those on the next show coming up, as well as Monday Night Football, which hopefully will be one that if you need a couple of points to make it over that finish line to get a W in week 9, that will work out in your favor. But Sean, any final thoughts on the games we've talked about today or the week as a whole that you want to summarize up here as we wrap up the show?
Just that this was another fun one. It was your opportunity to claw back some serious points to deal with this bye-laden landscape here. You mentioned the huge games from a number of players. Blair and I had a team score 193, and that team did not have Joe Mixon, as any listener will know that obviously
I'm not
it did
surprised.
not. But that one driven by Travis Etienne, by Kenneth Walker. These young backs are also hitting in a way that is fantastic for us. Those are the players that we emphasize. It allows you to build that elite receiving core around them. That part has been really fun. But it's also been fun to watch some of these best ball teams claw back in. We've got a lot of exposure to guys like Fant, and then some exposure to someone like Kmet, but also you and I specifically have plenty of exposure to TJ Hawkinson, who now that he gets into a real NFL offense, just a superstar. Well, that's probably an exaggeration, but someone who's a very solid NFL starter. The Lions are going to regret that trade. That one was kind of mind-boggling when it was announced. You never know, right? You get very invested in a certain player, and you tend to see his performances on the field, his stat line, his peripherals in a certain light. But the certain light that we've been looking at them through was one that made it not surprising at all that he would come through for the Minnesota Vikings this week. As tight end scoring is always so difficult to come by, to have a bunch of big tight end games, especially since Greg Dulcich, someone we also have a huge amount, both in terms of drafting for best ball, but then making him that waiver priority a couple of weeks before he came off of the injured list. To get all those points when Dulcich is out just makes you even more excited for what you can do going forward as he comes back. He has really been the breakout star early on for the Broncos. But to kind of finish that thought off, I think that what we are seeing is that although individual stars within those first 2 or 3 rounds are carrying teams, you're also getting interesting mixes of scoring to where one week a team can put up 200 and the next week they come back with 85 and vice versa. You're not seeing the exact same team at the top of the leaderboard too often in most leagues. Now, there are some teams out there, obviously, when you look up the FFPC, the underdog leaderboards, those teams that are out there and gapping the field, they have the perfect mix of players who are scoring extremely big numbers every week. But in the vast majority of leagues, you're getting a lot of balance. That part of it is fun. We now have 3 weeks remaining in the FFPC regular season. In most other leagues, you still have 5 weeks to go. You got a lot of time to pull it back. If you had your team devastated by buys in week 9, that means you should be in great shape in week 10, 11, 12 to reverse that on your opponents, get those points, and make your own playoff push. It's been such a fun landscape for making dynasty trades as teams have so many different needs and so many different valuations. You see all these trades come out of left field that, every once in a while you're going to disagree with one side or the other, but to have so many different possibilities where in most years it feels more straightforward or clear cut in a way that isn't necessarily bad, but it just isn't as interesting, right? There's a boring, straightforward element to it that's not, again, good or bad, but less exciting. All of the injuries here in Colin, I know you as a Green Bay Packers fan were bummed out by it. I know that so many of the starting lineups that I have lose a full player, and you only have so many starting lineup spots. But today, Romeo Doubs goes out at the very beginning where it's one play. And so you just project, if he does that on a half a dozen plays. But you lose Doubs in a matchup against a terrible Detroit Lions team. And then you see the Packers lose this game. And you're thinking to yourself, how is that even possible? If Doubs is out there, maybe he goes for 200 yards in this game. Again, that part unrealistic. And yet to lose such an exciting young player coming off of his best game of his career last week. Injuries are always a part. They're a part that we wish we didn't have, but you take them and you go on. Doubs will try and do the same. You feel for him. It seems like this is, probably a multi-week injury to where he may even have to go on IR. But big picture, week 9, I think, came through. The defenses did rise back up, and yet individually, big performances. I enjoyed watching this one. It's been a lot of fun. It's been fun doing the show with you. I just thank everybody for listening to us tonight. And as we've been going through these weeks, the community is great. We had some good feedback from the show on the charity Guillotine League to be able to have that and to have that interaction and know that people are caring about things beyond just the fantasy. It makes it so cool. Good luck, everybody, today. You're listening to this on Monday. Good luck tonight. Win that Monday Night Football game. Take the contest in Week 9, and we're off to the races.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Sean, that Guillotine League. We are waiting on Monday Night Football to see if we can stay ahead to continue in that. So we'll have an update for people on that. We talk on Tuesday. Hopefully it'll be another success. We'll be into the final 3. That was a fun show as we recap those games. We'll be back with the rest of those and more. Thanks again to WinBet for supporting today's podcast. We will be back with that Tuesday edition bright and early. Make sure not bright and early, actually late in the afternoon on Tuesday. Make sure you're subscribed to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed to get that as soon as possible. But until then, my name is Colin Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland and check out all of Sean's work up on rotoviz.com. And until then, have a good one.